Okay, I think it is time for us to have a little talk about policy, incentives, and outcomes because it seems humans cannot resist this extremely strong impulse to embrace policies that conceptually sound good, even if through bad incentives they create exactly the wrong outcomes. If the outcome you want to see in 2026 in crypto is exactly the opposite of 2025, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. All right, welcome everyone. Let's see who's here. We've got Hilldog is here. Let's go. Joe Davidson is here. Hello, thanks for joining. Hilldog says delegate to AOS stake pool ticker AOS. Thank you for that. Thanks. Brown Beardo says, whoa, buddy, I was beginning to wonder if we were coming on tonight. All set now and locked in. Okay, nice. The poor astronaut, he took 3 wrong turns while trying to portage his canoe. At least it isn't desert. That's true. He's not in the desert. This is kind of a high alpine meadow kind of setting. Thank you for saying that, Hilldog. Thank you for saying that. Squirt Skateboards, let's go. Charles Barish on Clarity Act. He is indeed. He is. Neo Chad said, I made it. Let's go. Squirt Skateboard says, that's weird. Charles isn't excited about more government corruption. Big surprise. Brian Packard, good evening. Brown Beardo says, I expect the worst, but hope for the best when it comes to the Clarity Act. Yep, I'm with you. Good morning, Mission Zambia. Thanks for joining. Dr. Doke is here. Good afternoon. Michael's here. Let's go. Fly Trout's here. Good morning. Elliot Adams here. At least we have a paddle. True. I don't have a PC. So I can't play it. I also do not have the other big one. I've got something else, but I don't have a PC at all. I would love to play it though. I will. So I'm going to acquire at some point in the future a PC just so I can play this game. I don't know why, but part of your pre-recorded opening is always cut off for me. Oh, okay. I don't know why that is. I don't know. Hola, Rulo. Hola. Thanks for joining. Google making moves with Cardano midnight, says Michael. Yep. Okay, let's get into it. So obviously, there was a lot of news this weekend. I'm not gonna lie, we've got a lot of news items to go through. What I'm starting to notice, and this isn't just about crypto, it really applies to crypto, but it applies to a lot of things in life right now, in governance, period. But we have all these, like, to their proponents, I'm convinced they seem like well-meaning policies. Conceptually, the policy sounds good. Like, what's a really high-profile example right now? Like, hey, let's fund childcare. Let's fund childcare. So, conceptually, well-meaning policy, right? It's like children should be taken care of. Conceptually, on paper, that sounds perfectly fine. But what happens, and we'll get into some examples of this happening sort of in in more strictly economic senses. But what happens is these policies, while conceptually well-meaning and maybe on paper even make sense, what happens is the policies are crafted in such a way that the incentives created by the policy create exactly the outcomes you don't want, or maybe if it's not the polar opposite of the outcome you want, it's an unanticipated, very negative outcome. So we see this a lot in governance, period. Probably going back to the dates of the very first governments, whatever we want to call the very first government, they probably made these mistakes as well. It's just human nature to focus a little bit too much on the concept of the policy and not enough on the policy that creates the right incentives to get to the outcome, to get to the right outcome. So what do I mean by this? Let's look at a great example, a big example of this right up front. But first, we got to talk about something important in the history of crypto. So over the weekend, it was the anniversary of the Hal Finney running Bitcoin Twitter post. So January 10th, 2019, 2009. Sorry, I'm a little off my game tonight, guys. I can't tell you why. Has to do with massive loss of sleep, but a little sleep deprived today. So apologies in advance. But this is the 2009 January 10th post from Hal Finney, or as I like to call him, Satoshi Nakamoto. So this, I like to highlight this every single year because this might be our, if Hal, a lot of people disagree with me, including Charles. Charles thinks it's Adam back, and there are good reasons to believe that. I think that's all the Britishness of Satoshi may have just been a good cover for Hal Finney. Possible. There is some reason why Hal Finney was the very first person to do a Bitcoin transaction with Satoshi, and it might be because they're the same person. We'll maybe never know. Maybe we'll never know. But it has now been what is it now? Is it 17 years? Is it 17 years since this original post on Twitter? It's kind of wild because I remember when Twitter first launched. I remember when somebody told me about Twitter and they're like, "Oh, hey, there's this new website called Twitter." And I also remember when Bitcoin was launched, although I didn't know of it when it was launched. But I think this is it's an interesting thing to observe that the history of Bitcoin is still very much a live thing. Like a guy who could have been Satoshi or could have just been the first person, you know, on the other end of a Bitcoin transaction was posting on Twitter, just like a lot of us do every single day. So that was this weekend, the running Bitcoin post. So here's what the thumbnail is really talking about. This kind of thing, though. So I think this is a good example because it's not strictly crypto related. It's going to apply. It applies to everybody in crypto. Probably going forward, a lot of people in crypto will encounter this in other jurisdictions. But here we see Brian Armstrong commenting on this for good reason. So this is the California billionaire tax. We've already talked about how Ellison and who is it? Was it Larry Page? I think I can't remember which one out of Larry Page and Sergey Brin has already announced their departure from California. But this infographic does a pretty good job of showing how it's not really just a 5% tax. So it seems like just a 5% tax or whatever, but because it's a tax on unrealized paper gains, it becomes something very different. So, of course, this is a good example because you can imagine a bunch of people sitting around, I'm not going to call them commies, but maybe commies sitting around and saying to themselves, hey, this sucks. We've got all these billionaires. They've got way too much money. Why don't we tax them? Why don't we have a special tax just for them? Let's have a special tax just for them. We don't like these billionaires. We want to take some of their shit and give it to other people, right? I'm not saying I agree with that conceptually, but commies would. So even if you disagree with them, though, what happens next is pretty much laid out in this infographic. As all of us in the non-commie world would have predicted, if you tax billionaires, they just leave. They go to another jurisdiction. They go somewhere else. And that's exactly what this is describing, especially when you tax people on unrealized gains and make them liquidate assets that they probably didn't want to liquidate. What you find is a flight to safety, a flight to tax safety, as if taxes in California weren't already enough. Now you're giving billionaires a brand new reason to leave. So let's see what people are talking about here. Let's see. Charles did an interesting pod with Blockchain Daily last week. Taiwanese channel mentioned Bitcoin DeFi in May, June. Oh, I haven't seen that. Thank you for letting me know. I haven't seen that. Charles is Satoshi, bro. He's denied it, and he's a little too young. Charles is a little bit too young. Charles is still a pretty young guy compared to a lot of us in crypto. He's significantly younger than I am. And I feel like I would have been far too young. So I feel like he's far too young. But he would have been very, very young. Let's see. Happens in education all the time. Hard to push back on any new policy because it's all for the kids in theory. Oh, great example. Great example. This is true in education. I've not been on the policy side of education, but certainly having been educated, it seems like this is the kind of thing you see in education all the time. I remember when my buddy told me about YouTube, had to move on from the beloved e-bombs world. Wow. Taking us back there. Satoshi Halfinimoto. There you go. Jensen said he's cool with it because he's not a moron. Yeah, I mean, it's just an additional price. It's an additional price they want to pay. Some of them are going to be cool with it and not leave, and some of them are going to get the hell out of there. Australia is trying to implement unrealized gains tax on superannuation retirement funds over 3 million. Wow, 3 million is that's pretty low. A lot of people achieve that over the course of, their entire career. A lot of people can achieve that number. So that's pretty low. Right. If the rich were dumb enough to stay in a place willing to steal their money, they would have never gotten rich in the first place. I mean, that's the thing. You can argue, sure, there's going to be some people who just love California. Maybe their kids, grew up in California. They can't imagine leaving California. It's certainly unlike almost any other place in the US. I think you can make that argument in a lot of ways. But like Brown Beardo is pointing out here, the kind of guys who become billionaires, they are often not going to take kindly to to getting taxed like this on unrealized gains. It's just like the self-selected group of billionaires. The things that got them to billionaire status are also the things that are going to make them very, very willing to leave a place like California. And I mean, let's face it, when you get $1 billion, it's like it's pretty easy for you to set up, kind of a fantasy lifestyle in some place like Texas, kind of like the migration that Joe Rogan modeled for them. They can all pull that off in much bigger ways than Joe Rogan even. So here's some more commentary on this. So a lot of very rich guys are talking about this. Here's Chamath, who we know is a very rich guy. He says, more calls from friends. The total wealth that has left California is now 1 trillion. We had 2 trillion of billionaire wealth just a few weeks ago. Now 50% of that wealth has left. So this is kind of what you would predict. If 50% of the billionaires in California left, you'd be like, okay, that seems like within the realm of predictions. This is like a number that seems realistic. 50% of that wealth has left, taking their income tax revenue, sales tax revenue, real estate tax revenue, and all their staffs and their salaries and income taxes with them. In other words, by starting this ill-conceived attempt at an asset tax, the California budget deficit will explode, and we still don't know if the tax will even make the ballot. California billionaires were reliable taxpayers, 13.3% every year. They were the sheep you could shear forever. Now California will lose this revenue source forever. Unless this ballot initiative is pulled, we will not stop the billionaire exodus. With no rich people left in California, the middle class will have to foot the bill. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing, but this is kind of how it goes, right? If the outcome you want is for things to be good, economically for everybody, probably you want as many big businesses as possible in your jurisdiction if they're employing a lot of people. And let's face it, a lot of people in California employed by big tech companies owned by big billionaires. So if you create if the outcome you want is sort of economic well-being for everybody, you could on paper decide, okay, we'll tax the billionaires. That'll be great. We'll redistribute. We'll do some wealth redistribution. On paper, that makes sense, but it creates this incentive. It creates this incentive to flee. And I'm sure the people behind this policy in California, I'm sure they convince themselves California is too beautiful. The weather is too wonderful. There are too many good things about California. Too many decent vineyards. People will not leave. But it turns out when you create these kind of incentives, like you don't know how long it's going to take, over the course of a long period of time, the incentives will kind of craft the result. Just like we say, the rules make the game in all sports. If you change the rules so that the field goal in American football becomes worth 50 points, every team is only going to specialize in field goals, right? They're going to give up running the ball. They're going to give up throwing the ball. They're just going to try to kick field goals. It'll become a sport of field goals. California has done something, maybe only 50%. So like Chamath is saying here, they don't even know if this is going to end up on the ballot or not. But we still don't know if this tax will even make the ballot. But if they lost 50% of the billionaire wealth in just a few weeks by the very mention of this, it's like, how many would they lose over the course of the next 10 years, right? What about new billionaires? How many new billionaires would build their companies in California and not leave, right? You might have a bunch of billionaires who've been there for decades now, but would the new billionaires ever show up? Would they replace, the old billionaires as they fell out? So this is a case, I think, where on paper this probably made sense to the people who crafted this policy, but it created exactly the incentives you would want in place if you were trying to accomplish the opposite of sort of what the policy is aimed at, which is economic well-being. Certainly if all the tech billionaires leave California, that is, you could make a good argument that's to the detriment of the economic well-being of the state. Okay, Elon pre-PayPal, maybe Satoshi, deep diving into the mechanics of money. Yeah, there's a persuasive argument around that. People can make a persuasive argument for Elon. John McAfee knew for sure. He claimed he did. Well, John McAfee said a couple different things though, right? John McAfee at first, there was a period where he said for sure Satoshi was South Asian. There was a period, I saw the interview where he said it. It wasn't even something he wrote. He said that in interviews that Satoshi was for sure South Asian. And he had talked to Satoshi, and Satoshi had like begged him not to release the information. And then he kind of like doubled back on that. He sort of changed the parameters of what he said he knew for sure. So I don't know about John McAfee. John McAfee was, if the administration in Washington, if they are wild boys, John McAfee was the wildest boy. So the documentary about John McAfee is kind of wild, and it implies some possible very bad criminal acts, right? I don't know what's true in that documentary. And the documentary doesn't even, try to state any of it as fact, but they present some things that are facts that, could imply some pretty bad criminality on the part of John McAfee. And some like kind of morally, at least one thing that's pretty morally reprehensible that he's accused of. I don't know if it's true or not. So John McAfee, very wild character. Satoshi is Banksy. I like that one. That one makes crypto even more colorful. That'd be great. So here's something else. So here I think is the opposite of the California billionaire tax. So we know Elon is very pro crypto, and we've been talking for a long time, actually years now on this channel, how, it's probably pretty predictable that X is going to turn into, I hate to use this example, but a lot of people will understand this example. X is going to turn into this WeChat kind of thing where it's a platform for sending money. It's a platform for doing everything. If you're familiar, there are apps like this in certain parts of the world where you do every single thing you do inside the app. I'm not saying that it would go that far with X, but X is like this giant platform that right now serves information. If Elon incorporates crypto into X, all of a sudden you could be doing a lot of your economic life on X, a lot of your social media, a lot of your informational stuff, your consumption of news. All of a sudden, X, which consumes a lot of people's lives already, would become even more sort of encompassing. So this seems like an intermediate step toward that. And some people sort of reported, I think some people saw this, and there were actually people reporting that Elon had incorporated crypto into X. That's not quite what's going on here, but this seems like an intermediate step toward that. So this is Nikita Beer is the head of product at X. So people have made a lot of hay today about the fact that he's also got Solana in his profile, but head of product at X and obviously a crypto person. somebody who's very, very familiar with crypto. He says, X is the best source for financial news, and hundreds of billions of dollars are deployed based on things people read here. That is certainly true. I think all of us in Cardano X are aware of that. Not that we're getting hundreds of billions, but we understand what's going on X. We're building smart cash tags that allow you to specify the exact asset or smart contract when posting a ticker. From Timeline, users will be able to tap them to see its real-time price along with all mentions of that asset. We're aiming to collect feedback as we iterate toward a public release next month. So this is going to be pretty interesting because obviously there's going to be a cash tag ADA, and the Cardano community cash tag midnight. The Cardano community is going to congregate around this cash tag. There's gonna be a lot of discussion, and we don't know yet if this is just gonna how much more this is going to be used than hashtags maybe once were used on Twitter. How this is going to work, if people are only going to use it when they want to see price quotes. We don't know how much is AI going to sort of like automatically tag things to that cash tag. We don't know, but it's very possible that we'll all be hanging out in cash tag ADA pretty soon. This definitely seems like it's a way to get a price feed into X, and it's sort of like, what's the first step? What's the first step if you're incorporating crypto into a social media platform? It's probably like, get people looking at the price and not going elsewhere. This will probably have a pretty deleterious effect on like CMC, like CoinMarketCap is probably going to get a lot fewer visitors if everybody can just do it inside X. There's probably a lot of people on X thinking about the price of an asset, shooting over to CMC, shooting back, that kind of thing. So I think this is kind of a first step toward X being that big money transfer business. When that happens, it's going to be pretty transformational for all of crypto. Streetwise says, WeChat A, I'm zeroing in on you. Yep, I have used it. I'm aware of it. I'm aware of it. Open borders may create a steady voter base. However, governments also, what's funny about that though? People use it in the West. People use it pretty significantly in the West, even knowing what it is. So open borders may create a steady voter base. However, governments also need steady community productivity. Open borders may create a steady voter base. However, governments also need steady community productivity. True. I'm done with X. The Cardano community deserves a better platform. Well, we're getting we're basically getting the Midnight Discord. That's kind of the only replacement for it so far. A lot of crypto used to be on Reddit. So when I first got into crypto, everything was on the Bitcoin Talk forums and on Reddit, but the Bitcoin Reddit was a very central component in the crypto social media discussion. So it's kind of it back then I would have been shocked to hear that in 2026 it would be Twitter. I was using X because of Cardano, and I think it's time to move away from X and find another source because I'm done with it. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see who wins. Somebody's going to win. Somebody's going to win the attention thing of the crypto community, and we don't know who it's going to be yet. Charles seems to be underground coding. Notice a few posts of his GitHub commits. Japan news could be interesting. Yeah, I thought that was cool. We talked about that a little bit on a previous video, how Charles was actually coding. We haven't seen Charles coding in a long time, if ever. I mean, I guess back in the day, maybe it's been so long I can't even remember now. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting change. So moving along, this is also happening this week. Speaking of transformational things for the crypto space, so it's all coming on the 15th, guys. The big markup. There's going to be a vote. There's going to be a vote in the Senate. We're on the 15th, we're kind of going to have an idea. Things will probably leak before then, like always, but by the 15th, we're going to have a good idea of what's happening in DC. And I don't know if people really understand how much it really is, what this post is implying. So Brown Beardo says, Reddit was fine, but it was way over moderated. I don't know of another social platform that can replace X. Yeah, pretty tall order to replace X at this point. Pretty tall order. So this post says, we're about to find out this weekend and coming week how powerful Coinbase is in DC, shaping up as Citadel versus Coinbase. So this is pretty well put because this is really what's going on. We've discussed this on this channel, but this is really TradFi versus crypto, right? And I'm not saying Coinbase is the end all be all of crypto, but in terms of what's being debated, and that's stablecoin yields, it kind of is. They're the ones that have the biggest stake in stablecoin yields, as part of Center, along with Circle, who's sort of like the issuer of USDC. You could argue, of course, Tether and some other entities, other central exchanges, they all have a stake in this, but almost nobody has as big a stake in this as Coinbase. So obviously, the crypto side of things wants to be able to provide yields willy-nilly, however the hell they want on stablecoins. That's the whole point of the Genius Act for them, right? They needed to get those yields. But the TradFi side of the world, they know that if the crypto guys are giving better yields on stablecoins, and you've got these stablecoins that are becoming pretty trusted, like USDC, right? I don't, you know, the discontent you hear about USDC is the same discontent you hear in the TradFi world. Somebody froze my account. That's what you hear. People pissed somebody froze the account, but you don't hear as much like you don't wake up and find, you know, a huge scandal on X because USDC as a system got hacked, right? All of USDC got hacked. That doesn't really happen. It's becoming pretty trusted in that sense. So if I was a TradFi institution, I would be worried. If I was offering yield-bearing accounts of some type, I would not want a new entrant in that race, especially in crypto, right? Because the crypto guys are going to kind of, they're going to be very fast moving. They're not going to play by the same rules. I would not want a bunch of crypto guys offering, like USDC accounts that paid more yield than my TradFi accounts I'm trying to sell to everybody. So you can understand the battle that is brewing here in the background. And like we've talked about, the TradFi guys, they've got an army of lobbyists that are in every single senator's office, probably every day, every single day, especially right now, they're probably in there trying to convince those senators to demand that the crypto guys not be turned loose with whatever kind of yields on stable coins they want. So is it ridiculous that we have to put up with this battle when really all we want, the main thing we want is regulatory clarity for all of our other assets, but the whole thing is kind of being held up by this stablecoin yield issue, right? And famously, I didn't include the clip from the interview, but Charles just gave an interview on a podcast where he said he's not optimistic about getting the Clarity Act in Q1, and this is the big item that everybody points to as holding up the Clarity Act. It seems like nobody's really worried about, the things we would be worried about, like which base layer tokens are going to be considered decentralized enough to get commodities treatment as opposed to securities treatment. No, it's the stablecoin issue. Here's another take on this. So first, I'm going to show you. First, let's look at this little post. New Senate banking staff just had a call with crypto leaders. I've heard and relayed that TradFi's demands to alter stablecoin yield rules are gaining traction in bipartisan negotiations on market structure bill. Senator Alsobrooks' proposal to restrict yield to transactions, not deposits, is viable. Yeah, imagine how much Coinbase wants that. Like yield only on transactions, not on deposits. Like Coinbase definitely wants you buying USDC and getting yield from them so that they can take your capital and do what they want with it. There are also other options on the table. It could involve restricting yield to regulated financial institutions, getting more clarity there. So that's the other thing that TradFi would love. If only they could do this stablecoin yield thing, they would much prefer that. As a sign of current vibes, it was already evident. Senate staff told crypto leaders they need prayers to get this bill over the finish line by January 15th markup. One source with direct knowledge told me, oh boy, he wrote, who boy. I'm guessing that's a regional variation of oh boy. So here's an attorney. Here's a crypto attorney, very much a crypto native. He's a lawyer at Consensus, formerly with the DOJ. He says, for what it's worth, I left the call. So he's subtly implying he was on the call. For what it's worth, I left the call more bullish than I had been previously. And you can understand, of course, Consensus is going to have their lawyers on the call. I left the call more bullish than I had been previously. We are close. Pitfalls for sure, but closer than we've ever been, and smart people calling the game. I'm optimistic. I'm kind of relieved is if this is the only thing, if they're going forward with something that looks a lot like the House Clarity Act, and the only thing is stablecoin yields. I've said this previously, but even if crypto loses, even if Coinbase loses on the stablecoin yield thing, it would suck. But it's kind of not the worst thing in the world for base layer cryptocurrencies like ADA, because ADA with its built-in awesome risk profile on staking, ADA is kind of competing in a lot of ways with stablecoin yield, right? Because everybody can get a certain yield, a yield of some type, staking ADA, and it's much lower risk than, in my opinion, my humble opinion, than blockchains that have slashing. When there's no slashing risk, obviously that's a better risk profile than when there is slashing. So in a lot of ways, ADA is sort of competing with some of the stablecoin yield. So if stablecoins couldn't provide yield on deposit, I don't want to say something that would be super unpopular, but it might actually be good for cryptocurrencies like ADA. So I think a lot of people will be a lot more down to park their crypto capital in something like an ADA if they could not get that stablecoin yield. So I'm not saying that means we should prefer that. I'm just saying there's a silver lining if that's the way it turns out. Speaking of Cardano, there were also a lot of very excited reports of this. Google Cloud specifically, has launched a Cardano pool, a Cardano stake pool on testnet, which is a necessary prerequisite for running a midnight node. Will it do the same on mainnet? So very interesting. We kind of knew this was happening. We'd been told that Google Cloud was going to be running a stake pool, maybe stake pools plural. We don't know. We just know they're participating. And there have been a lot of hints. Whenever any little tidbit about Google Cloud comes out, there are always a bunch of insiders posting little hints that there's much more to come on the Google front. So I'm always keeping an eye on this. I'm always very excited to see what's going to happen with Google, because we keep getting hints that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg here, which I definitely like the sounds of. Okay, what do we got here? Fly Over Me is here. Fly Over Me. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Charles is saying no. No, he didn't say no until 2029. What he said was he's not optimistic for Q1. And if we don't get it before midterms and the left takes one chamber of the Congress, then we might not get it till 2029. So, historically, when a Republican administration has all three houses, historically, very, very high chance they're going to lose when they've got the executive branch and they've got both majority in both the Senate and the House. There's a very good chance they're going to lose one of those two sides of Congress in midterms. So I think we should plan for the worst there. We should plan for the worst and assume that the left is going to take either the House or the Senate during midterms. So anything we want to get past, we definitely want to get past before midterms. But, we've got a decent amount of time to work things out. I mean, it's January and we've got until November to get this passed. And it's kind of some centerpiece. I'm not saying it's the most important legislation that the Trump administration sort of promised, but if they did not pass something that looked a lot like the Clarity Act during this Trump White House, it would certainly be regarded as a failure. So I think there's going to be quite a bit of pressure to get that done in between now and February. So even if we don't get it in Q1, it's very possible that they can't come to a good compromise on the 15th and we don't get it. And then there's like the February recess and we don't get it until then, that would push us into March and we probably wouldn't get it in Q1, but then we've got Q2, Q3, right? So we've got a little bit of time. I'm optimistic we get it. I don't know when we get it. Cardano is the most well-run crypto on earth. I don't trust anything in the industry anymore. I agree with that. I do agree with that. Dolphy Wolf's here. Let's go. Let's go. Google is the Google is the Fortune 2 legitimacy injection we need. It kind of is. The it's weird because crypto is so trustless. We're so focused on being trustless, but Google kind of provides the clout necessary for other people in this trustless industry to trust us, which is ironic because the whole point is building stuff trustlessly. So it's kind of ironic, but I think you're right. I think you're right. Speaking of policy and Cardano, so I spent the entire 2025 budget DRep season posting that graph from Tempo, and now other people are making similar graphs showing depletion of the Cardano treasury and how the amount we were spending was, very, very high, much higher than I wanted, much higher than Cardano wanted. And of course, that whole discussion, not between me and Cardano Well, but Cardano Well and certain people, led to Cardano Well leaving the space, much to many people's chagrin. Cardano Well left the space over this, and I do think it's very, very important. But other people are starting to pick this up as well now. More and more, I see more and more people. Not that these people weren't talking about it before, but I'm saying I see more and more people talking about it in a much more high-profile way. So this post says, the Cardano Treasury is not a piggy bank for saving your unsuccessful business ideas. I'd rather see a project fail than be a zombie that wastes treasury funding. The Cardano Treasury is here to fund high impact opportunities and public goods that benefit us all. And this is one of the differences. So we really as a community haven't come to a consensus on this. A lot of people disagree with this. I very much agree that the Cardano Treasury should be used to fund infrastructure things and other public goods that benefit us all, and not so much on individual projects, right? Just because someone has some project and they basically want, VC money without having to go deal with a VC, in my opinion, that's kind of what Catalyst is for. And I feel like the Treasury, I voted to give Catalyst some money because I think Catalyst has always been cool. But I think the Cardano Treasury should not be this, sort of public opinion thing where if, some project founders are well liked, they just go and get money for their individual project. I think it should be more about the infrastructure, because you kind of want the projects to get built on the very best infrastructure. And you want the projects that get built to be ones that are, have a higher chance of succeeding on their own. You don't want to pay for a ton of projects to get built that won't create value. You want entrepreneurs to build projects on really good infrastructure you paid for. You want the infrastructure to attract the really good entrepreneurs. You don't want to use money to attract the projects that aren't going to be successful. It's better to put that money toward infrastructure so that it's very attractive. So the infrastructure is attractive to the entrepreneurs. You don't want to use money because every entrepreneur is going to be attracted to the money, the bad ones included, and you might pay for them to build a project that doesn't really create value. So I think more and more people are kind of talking about this. So we also had this happen. So let's hit the comments a little bit. Charles has spoken at Google a few times. Yep, he sure has. As far as I know, I wasn't there, but my understanding is he has. It's about time for those seeds to germinate and grow, definitely. Okay. How does one check the treasury balance? So I encouraged one of the kind of data platforms to start posting those types of metrics. I think it'd be great if I encourage them to post sort of like a measure of how much we had spent in the given year. Well, I can't turn Jerome Powell off here. That's kind of weird. But I encourage them to start posting exactly how much we had spent in a given year, and to post how, like, just have a little balance that showed how much was in the treasury, how much we spent this year, how much was projected to come into the treasury, because we have both, it's a share of both the normal ADA inflation and of transaction fees. But we can make that we can make that projection on a yearly basis. And of course, the amount coming in through inflation is always getting smaller because we're a hard capped deflationary cryptocurrency. We're not like Ethereum where it's just perpetually inflationary. Um, so I encourage one of those platforms who made a post about they had a cool new feature, and I encourage them to also include things like this. I think it'd be great if somebody would do that, because part of the problem is people don't really realize how much we're spending, and some people actually got mad when I would post it before, saying that it was like anti-growth, and I was like, I don't think it's anti-growth for people to understand how much we're burning and how much is coming in on a yearly basis. Josh Mick says, looking forward to real world assets and large institutions moving on chain. That is when Cardano lifts off. Yep, that would be good for Cardano. I like the till inflation and burn model. Builders are paid and the transaction then creates cause burn, maintaining inflation and growth. Describe it for me, Robert Scott. Describe the tell inflation and burn model. I'm usually not in favor of burning, if you're talking about real burning of assets. But tell me exactly what you're talking about. So this, I think, is an older video. People were posting it today like it was brand new. I think it's older. But it looks like somebody hit Grok with it, and Grok confirmed it was from like July. So this was posted on the 9th. So what was that? Like Friday. This is posted on Friday. So this is the White House talking about the de minimis exemption, which I think we really do need in crypto. So if we got the de minimis exemption in crypto, I think we could actually start doing a lot more of the real world stuff. Even if we start building real world stuff in crypto, I think people are still going to be hesitant to do it just because of the tax implications. If we don't have a de minimis exemption, it's just like the buying coffee with Bitcoin thing, right? No matter how much you try to scale Bitcoin and get Bitcoin to work for little transactions like this, even if it's for the Lightning Network, people aren't going to want to use even Bitcoin as a currency because of the tax implications, right? They don't want to pay taxes on their gains every time they buy a coffee with Bitcoin. Back in the old days, this happened. I would go places and there would literally be people buying things as small as even a coffee with Bitcoin. So obviously not all the time, not often, but when I would talk to people about crypto, they would say, hey, did you know you can buy coffee at this coffee shop with Bitcoin? Did you know you can buy this over here with this cryptocurrency? So people were doing it all the time. The tax thing has really gotten in the way of that. So we really do need this de minimis exemption. I hope that the White House, all of their crypto energy is obviously focused on the market structure bill right now. But I hope they get back to this de minimis exemption thing. It's really one of the more important things in crypto. We really, really need that. And this is another thing. If we have to expect the worst in November, we kind of have to be afraid that the other side the left is going to take control of either the House or the Senate. And then, the way things have become polarized, it used to not be this way. Crypto wasn't a political issue. Now it obviously is. So things like this we probably have to get them before November. So here's something else. We talked about the $5 wrench attack on a previous video. So here's a list, and this is not the reason that NFT Paris was canceled. So this poster admits that down below, but he has a very impressive list of all of the wrench attack type incidents that occurred just in France. I think these were all just in France, and they've got what's crazy is as you read through here, there's multiple what he calls acts of mutilation. I know this particular one was like a dismemberment of a finger, but this is not the only one. There's even two of these where the wrench attackers were removing parts of the person's body as part of their kidnapping thing. But it goes on and on. It's all kinds of people in crypto. A professional in the sector held hostage, an engineer kidnapped, a cryptocurrency investor and his family tied up and beaten. Um, 6 men arrested and suspected of having wanted to kidnap a crypto holder for the fourth time. The father of an entrepreneur based in Dubai, victim of a violent kidnapping in the middle of the street. Um, and they're implying in this town, not in Dubai, obviously. Police catch several people red-handed while committing an attack at the home of a crypto professional. A Swiss man kidnapped and held hostage. Former trader kidnapped and held hostage. Man working in the crypto sector. So it's all kinds of people, and all of these occurred in 2025 and 2026. And already there have been 3 just in 2026. So the wrench tech thing is very real. I don't pay any attention at all to the metals markets. So I don't know. I know that silver. I know that silver went crazy, and that phenomenon was kind of remarkable. But I don't really pay any attention to the metals markets on a daily basis. So let's see what else we got. Let's see. Oh, and yeah, I think that's the last news item. So we had some pretty big news. We had some pretty big news this weekend. Probably the biggest piece is the X integration of what they're calling smart cash tags. That's going to be a pretty big change. Sounds like we won't see anything on that until next month. And then we also had this. So behind the scenes, this is going to be very, very big news going on in crypto. We probably won't see much of it until drafts start leaking. So this, I believe, is supposed to come to light on Thursday. So if the past is any way to judge, we'll start seeing leaks of this before Thursday, or at least people who've seen leaks of drafts, things like that. We'll kind of start hearing, and most likely there will be outrage in crypto, no matter what it is. There'll be outrage at whatever it is. People will be paying attention to the stablecoin yield issue, but it could be there's a lot of other things waiting for us, waiting to spring themselves on us in that draft. It could be some things about the decentralization threshold to become a commodity that we won't like. But this week is kind of going to be a good indicator of where we're actually at, which is something we haven't really been able to gauge very well for at least a month, because we've sort of been waiting since really late November. Since late November, we've kind of been waiting for the Senate to make some progress on this, and we didn't really know where we are. We haven't had any good way to tell how far along they are. So here's Robert Scott. Till inflation paid to builders through transactions they create. Those transactions also burn fees. Okay, so the burning you're talking about is fees. You're saying when you say burn fees, you're saying those transactions will pay fees, right? Till inflation paid to builders through transactions they create. Inflation is paid to incentivize builders' fees burned off these transactions. Inflation is paid to incentivize builders' fees. Oh, so you want to give some of the inflation of the cryptocurrency to the builders? I mean, that's a wildly different model. I don't know. I don't know if that's really good, right? You're basically subsidizing the builders through inflation of the cryptocurrency. I don't know if that's really good, because you could have non-profitable businesses being subsidized. What I'm trying to avoid is us subsidizing businesses that will never be profitable. So if somebody builds something and we're subsidizing it with inflation, we might make mistakes as to determining who should get that inflation, right? Somebody might be very charismatic or a very good poster on social media, or doing, basically the X version of SEO on us or something very effectively. They might be able to build a good campaign to get that inflation. And they might also be building something that's totally never going to be profitable, right? The best way to determine what's going to be profitable is free commerce, right? Adam Smith's invisible hand, the markets, people being willing to pay for their products. That's the best way to determine what's going to be profitable. If we, as you know, if like the DReps are deciding who to give this inflation to, they're going to make a lot of mistakes and they're going to subsidize. When I say they, I mean, I'm one of them. So I'm saying we as a group are going to make a lot of mistakes and subsidize things that will never be profitable. So I don't think we want our inflation going to that because too many mistakes would be made. And I think you want the markets to determine who's going to be profitable. I don't think you want the DReps guessing that these guys are going to build something great. So give them the inflation in the currency. I don't think that's the right way to go. So Bram Beardo says, how would you determine who's a builder? Are the builders supposed to pay back? They should be loans or somehow be able to reimburse. So it's kind of all like central planning. Like all this kind of stuff is sort of like central planning stuff. I think we actually need to embrace, like, it's good for us to subsidize the build out of our infrastructure and other things that are like obviously good for the whole ecosystem. But I don't think we should be picking and choosing losers because we're going to pick to subsidize a bunch of things that are going to be losers. And that money's basically gone forever, right? I think you want the free market to determine to pick the winners and losers because the free market is always going to do it correctly, right? If the central planners are giving inflation in the currency to, if they're picking who gets that, I think you're gonna be like subsidizing a lot of bad projects. That's my personal take. Other people can disagree, but I mean that's kind of Adam Smith's whole thing with the invisible hand, right? Like the free markets are really good at that. Like it's really obvious when you don't subsidize businesses, it's really obvious which ones of them are flourishing and which ones are failing. But if you subsidize them in this kind of way, I think it becomes really not obvious and you just have like there's a huge parasitic draft off the treasury if you do it that way. Um, that's definitely my take on it. But I think these are the big things that are going to happen this week, you know. And I mean, this is kind of a similar, that's kind of a microcosm of this same thing, right? What we've got here is the TradFi institutions saying we don't want to compete with crypto. We don't want, with our yield bearing accounts, we don't want to compete against the crypto guys. But you want Adam Smith's invisible hand to tell you which is better. The crypto guys offering yield bearing stablecoins to people or the TradFi institutions of the world offering yield bearing accounts to the world. I think we all know which ones we're going to choose. We already know because it's already being done, right? Coinbase has been offering stablecoin yield for a long time. And we already know that people like it. Like people use quite a bit of it. So we already know the answer to that question. I mean, but what Citadel is requesting here is the opposite of that. They're not asking for, they don't want the free market to determine. They want, by policy, for the crypto guys to not be able to compete. And it seems like for the end users, for us in retail, for the normal people, it's always better when the policy allows everybody to compete. You know, obviously there's externalities. You don't want somebody to be, you know, dumping plutonium in a river, and that's why they're able to provide you with cheaper energy than those who are complying with the regulations. You want to limit those kind of externalities. But here what we have is one group not wanting to compete with the other group. They're asking the policymakers, craft the policy so that we don't have to compete with these guys. And that's kind of, to me, that's the same thing as giving inflation to the builders. It's sort of like, we're going to subsidize you so that you have this unfair advantage against other builders who don't get the tail inflation, right? I think you should let the free markets pick the winners and losers because the free market will never make a mistake, right? The free market, you're going to know because one party is going to be profitable and another party is not going to be profitable. And sure, sometimes you do need to incentivize. Sometimes it is good to kickstart things, right? Sometimes you do need to incentivize things, but if you, man, the subsidy through inflation thing is just seems like you're robbing the whole community to pick winners and losers. So, but I think this is going to be one of the biggest things going on this week. I think this is going to be really big news. I think the cash tags, where are they at? I think the X cash tags are sort of just like a first step. This to me is just the first step in the integration of crypto into X. So I think this is a bigger deal than people are going to think it is. I think people are just going to say this is X acknowledging that a lot of crypto people are on X. But I think it's more than that. I think this is just sort of a first step by Elon in his, longer arc of turning this thing into a crypto platform. So Robert Scott says, if Google starts creating massive transaction fees, part of which go to the treasury, we take from the successful investment in unsuccessful, looking for the unicorn. Yeah, you can definitely, if you do choose to subsidize certain businesses, you'd want to engage in portfolio theory. That's for sure. Yeah, I think that's for sure the way you'd want to do it. So anyways, I think this is the big news for this week. I think X engaging in more in starting to look like more of a crypto platform. I think that's a really big deal. I think this is a really big deal. It seems like California and jurisdictions like it will probably just do more and more of this stuff in the future. It feels like things are getting a little bit more, these kind of jurisdictions are getting more and more interested in redistribution of wealth, not less. Things are just kind of getting more commie in jurisdictions like this, And you notice, it's sort of like the jurisdictions who like to do this are the jurisdictions where they feel like people will pay the fee to live in that place. It's always the very desirable spots that think they can get away with this. The jurisdictions nobody wants to live in, they definitely can't get away with this. So I think we'll see more and more of this, but I think that is the big news for the week. So if nobody has anything else, I think we'll have to just start getting ready for the week. And I think we will. I think we are going to see a lot of action on the Clarity Act front. I think we'll start seeing leaked drafts, or people will come on X talking about having seen drafts of the market structure bill. So the information is going to slowly leak out over the week. So I'm looking forward to seeing whatever it is. I hope it's all good stuff. I hope it looks a lot like the Clarity Act. There's a high bar for decentralization, which is great for Cardano because we're going to be able to meet those high bars. I hope it's all of those things, but it'll kind of start dripping out to us, I think, over the course of the week. So we'll have some things to look at this week. Michael says it's horrible for small businesses too, not only billionaires. Yep. The vast majority of America is places most people don't want to live. True. By territory, it definitely is. Watch it, Wolf of Wall Street's Charles H. interview. Yep. Peace. All right. I hope everybody had a great weekend. And I think this week will be a pretty good week of news. So we'll have some things to talk about this week as we get more details on the Clarity Act going forward. So I think we're going to have some good things to talk about this week, but I hope everybody had a great weekend. I hope you're looking forward to a good week, and I will talk to you soon.